One team, 3 lads, approximately $5,137,468.32. This summer, Gunnar Davis, Josh Killian, and Michael Murphy are the Trident Trio. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 11 of the Trident Talk.
And that was in one take. That was
I'm
smooth.
so happy.
That
I didn't
was good,
flub it. That
Mike.
was great.
That was really good.
$5,137,468.32. Quite
A
literally
lot of money. That's what that is.
A number I pulled out of my ass.
That's a
I was
lot
like,
of money.
I just need a number that sounds obnoxious, and that was the first thing that came to head. All right.
Wow, that was good. That was really good.
Welcome everyone to episode 11 or 12, whatever, because we have a part 2, but whatever. Welcome to the next episode of Try and Talk. All right. So today we went ahead and put out a kind of questionnaire to the public about a very important document in the buying process for a home, and that is indeed the first thing you'll ever consider, the buyer's agency agreement. So we let the internet go wild with questions, and we're here to answer them today.
So we went ahead and we put some of the common questions on just a pretty straightforward set piece of paper that hopefully we can just read off to you, so that you can have your answers, your questions answered as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. Because I know that whenever someone slides that piece of paper your direction, or any time that comes into play, it looks pretty intimidating. It does look pretty intimidating. It looks a little bit scary, but have no worry, we're here to help, because it's really not. It's actually in your best interest, is what it's for, actually, to protect you as a public individual.
So I guess that kind of leads us into question 1, and that's pretty basic. What is the buyer's agency agreement? So, put in blatantly, the buyer's agency agreement is a legal document that protects both the buyer and their agent in the sakes of representation. What does that mean? That means if you have this signed document for your sake as a client, if you go out and show a property and maybe you don't get along with your agent or something like that, but you have an agency agreement and you really like the property and you want to put in an offer, that agent legally has to put in an offer for you if you demand it. Okay? This is, for clientele, the main purpose of a buyer's agency agreement is to prevent what's known as agent abandonment, which you wouldn't think that happens too terribly often, but it's actually scary how frequent agent abandonment is, just because you don't get along with the agent, or maybe they think they have better things to do, because the unfortunate thing is there are, sleazeballs out there, to put it in PG terms.
Both ways, not even just consumers, but what also comes to agents as well.
Exactly. And that's another thing, and if you want to talk about it from the agent's perspective, like from our side of things, we get a buyer's agency agreement, so in the case in which we show a property, so for instance, I know a while ago we had, I think it was Gunnar and I had someone that we were showing a property to, and it turns out the client that we were working with had friends who were realtors. Mm-hmm. They just weren't available that day, and they wanted to see the property. So, and from our perspective, that looks, sleazy, because they could have us show the property and then go with their other friends, and the other friend gets the commission for the time. So, and that's kind of the purpose behind the buyer's agency agreement. But moving on to the second question, another very frequent worry is, what is the length of the agreement? How long is the typical buyer's agency agreement for? And moving on from that, how long does the process take from signing the buyer's agency agreement to signing the closing papers?
So from day one of representation between you and your agent to the very last day hopefully you'd stay in touch afterwards.
Exactly.
But from day one of you actually signing off on it, that this is your agent as representative of you within the transaction that you could possibly have, to the closing date.
Exactly. So if you want to look directly at the buyer's agency agreement, you'll see that in paragraph 1, both one's line and 2, that's quite literally the purpose of this paragraph, beginning and ending. This agreement begins on X date and ends at 11:59 p.m. on Y date, and includes both dates. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. Some people think that it just expires at some random time in the day. No, it expires at 11:59, to where going into the next day you are no longer under an agreement. But in terms of typical agreements, it kind of varies from case to case, but typically in your average house search, you're going to see that the buyer's agency agreement will go for anywhere between 60 to 120 days. The reason why it's not like 2 days or something like that is because the buyer's agency agreement legally has to be signed going through the actual home search process, as well as
buying, lender approval,
exactly.
All of that, the inspection period, all of that.
Exactly, and that's the purpose behind it. That's why you'll see 120 days I mean, very rarely does it go beyond that. I mean, listing agreements probably go longer than that on average. I just heard a Nerf gun cock.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable anymore.
Don't hit me in the eye if you're going to shoot it.
This is officially a hostile work environment. Okay, I heard it go off, but I didn't see the Nerf gun. I'm scared now. But the final portion of that question, how long does the process take from signing the buyer's agency agreement to signing the closing papers? So it varies heavily based upon a couple of factors. First and foremost, and the biggest one, hands down, is how long does it take you to actually get an accepted offer? Okay, this could be quite literally the first house we show, we write an offer on, and boom, it's accepted that day. To
like in 24, 48 hours.
Exactly. To, okay, well, we've been searching for, like, I know a client I've been working with for like 4 months at this point, and it's a hard market, unfortunately, and they have
Stuff goes quick. Stuff goes quick right now.
And they're in no immediate rush to move either. So I mean, if you want to focus from the actual acceptance of the contract onward to the closing table, it's on average anywhere between 1 to 2 months, depending on a number of circumstances. Is this a cash deal? Is this a finance deal? Well, how long do we want an inspection period for? And
the market trends, like what? Like
precisely.
The way the market is right now compared to what it was in 2008.
Exactly.
It's like that also plays into account as well, how long the agency agreement lasts and how well that it's put on paper. So.
But on average, you're looking at anywhere between 1 to 2 months, given a pretty normal set of circumstances.
In quotes, we've got 1 day left as of recording this. You'll be receiving this in 2021. This will be the first.
Oh yeah, happy 2021!
Happy
New Year, everyone!
New Year. Connor, Happy New Year!
Happy New Year! I was gonna. I was waiting to put in I forgot what I was gonna say. Those agreements, I think a lot of agents here usually do about a year once they sign it.
Really?
6 months to a year, just to give them that amount of time, but it usually
A lot of
doesn't
them
last
just do a year. Yeah, they don't have to.
nearly
Obviously,
as
if
much.
it goes beforehand, obviously.
Enough time for the house searching to have commenced, you to get approval and get everything out of the way to get the keys in your hands.
It's quite literally
I'd say it would be about what Mike says, but
from the day that it's like, you know what, I think I might get a house, to, wow, we have a house now.
Yep.
Okay, that's typically, now especially like listing agency agreements as well, those typically tend to go a lot longer as well, because it's typically the process of, hey, I think I want to sell my house to, okay, well now we got to stage your house, now we got to clean your house out, now we got to do this, now we get a quick clean deed, and all of those sorts of things. So, which again, case-to-case circumstance.
that sounds expensive, Michael.
It is.
What does that cost me?
Well, for a buyer's agency agreement, you know, you figure, we talked about commissions in the last Trident talk. What if I told you that as a buyer, you don't pay me commission?
I'd say you're lying.
What if I told you that the only thing that you pay for a buyer's agency agreement as a buyer is $295? And I'll tell you what, I don't even see that money.
Wow.
And it doesn't come out until you close on your house.
Exactly. And that's the thing. So one of the biggest misconceptions about legal representation in the real estate industry is that you as a buyer pay the buyer's agent commission. You don't even think about that. The only person that actually worries about commission is the selling side. And that's considered what's known as a closing cost, which we'll get back to that. That's called foreshadowing. So quite literally just the $295, and that's seen in section 4, broker's search for property and broker's commission / fee, line 12. So exactly. Yeah, there's a huge hierarchy of splits and commission differences and things that come into play before the agent even receives a paycheck. So sure, you up front have maybe a 6.5% commission on a property sale. Well, of that 6.5%, only 40% goes to the buying side. Yep. And that buying side, only a fraction of that goes to the actual agent itself. So it goes through a bureaucracy. Yeah. That's how quickly $200,000 becomes like $2,000.
Yeah, on paper, when let's say you're talking 6% or whatever of a $200,000 property, I mean that turns into $12,000. People think $12,000 is what's going directly to the agent when that's not necessarily the case at all.
It goes to both agents, both brokerages, the MREC, taxes, and all sorts of things.
A lot of the resources that the agent is using as well to help you get into that home, hopefully that would be your dream home.
Exactly, and that's kind of a big point that. But one thing I was kind of, one question that did come up that kind of struck my attention, a couple questions actually. What if I find a house myself and we still have our agreement? So you see this actually pop up quite a few times, with Zillow being the new hit thing.
Yeah.
Even if it's incredibly inaccurate. But let's say
we don't hate Zillow. We should say that we don't hate Zillow. There's just
I hate Zillow.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit. I mean, like we don't hate Zillow. It's just
I strongly
dislike. We just have certain softwares, companies, and stuff that we use that we find data more accurate to our area specifically. We know that in other areas as well, Zillow might even be more accurate than the resources that we have, but to our area locally here in Missouri, it's just not the best for us to use, so you won't really find a lot of us using it, at least between the Trident trio. You won't find us using it as much. So if that's your favorite place to go looking for any brokerage information, I apologize.
Sorry.
Yeah, I apologize. Or if we don't start up front and we say, if you're thinking for a price point for your house, and you say, well, Zillow told me this, and we don't come out of the gate screaming that that's correct, we have documentation that proves otherwise. So
we here at the Trident trio just like to use accurate information.
Yeah. We want to get the most, whether you're listing or you're buying, we want to get the most efficient numbers for you as quickly as possible.
Alrighty, which bringing it back, so let's say you do find a house on Zillow though, and we still have our agreement. Well, if you look at section 5, which is the exclusive agreement portion, lines 1 through 2, they are as follows. This is an exclusive agreement. If a buyer buys a property during the term of this agreement, whether broker introduced the property to the buyer or not, broker is entitled to total commission as follows. And that talks about properties that are both in the MLS and outside the MLS. So if you find a property that is of interest to you and you decide to write an offer and everything, well, who's going to be the person writing the offer? The agent. Who's going to be the person working through your inspections? The agent. Who's going to be the person doing this and that, and quite literally the entire bureaucracy that comes with a residential sales contract or special sales contract? The agent. And that's why it ultimately comes down to it. Sure, the property search is a pretty important and big portion of it, but that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I was like, that's not nearly as complicated as the background work that goes into making sure that you get into the house with the most safety as possible, as quickly as possible, with everything in line so that there's no, not allegation, but there's no
loose ends.
Loose ends, that's a good way of putting it. Tied up that once you're in there, this is going to come back to bite you. That is all what the agent does in the time that you're not seeing during the house search.
Exactly. And that's a very good question to ask. It's a matter of what can an agent provide, sort of thing.
It's a common question that's on a lot of people's minds.
Exactly. So, which kind of slowly works its way into the next question. And this was kind of one that kind of struck me as odd at first, but then I kind of thought about it and it's like, this is actually something that happens pretty frequent in our industry. So in the case that a client is shown a house under agreement, but doesn't show interest in it then, but then later, after the agreement is up, the client proceeds to put in an offer, what happens then? So this is saying you and I are working together and I show you a property. And it doesn't really hit you right up front, unfortunately. Well, a couple months go by, we haven't found anything, and the agreement just unfortunately spoils, and you find yourself looking at the property like, what, that house wasn't too bad, right? And you decide to put in an offer. Well, first and foremost, if you don't have an agent through that process, I'm so sorry that you don't have someone legally representing you and helping you in that case, because that is horrifying in my opinion. Yeah. But what happens? Well, going back to the same section 5, in terms of exclusive agreements, if you look at line 8, so if within 90 days after the end of the agreement, buyer buys or contracts to buy a property which broker has introduced to buyer, broker is entitled to fees stated above. What does that mean? That means if within 90 days after the agreement, you decide to go back and write an offer on that property, if the broker or buyer agent introduced you to it, they are entitled to compensation. Okay? If you or a loved one has been affected by... No, I'm kidding.
I was about to say, it sounds kind of like insurance.
It really does. And I don't mean to come off like that, but it's just, documents like this sound like...
They're big and intimidating, and it's like, we want to make sure that everybody knows and understands this, because they're really not, and they're really in your best interest. They're not out here to scare you specifically to run and go do this thing and tackle it by yourself, or to, scamming out as much stuff as possible. That's not at all what the case is.
No, God, no.
No. It's quite the opposite. It's so that you don't get taken advantage of when because not everyone understands everything that goes into a real estate transaction. And so we're here to be your guide through that.
And that's another thing we've kind of glossed over. Like, we've shown that, we have a decent understanding behind what we're talking about, behind the contracts, behind these questions, behind this agreement. There are so many agents out there, and I mean, I don't have any names or anything in particular because, well, legally I can't say any, but there are so many agents out there that have not the slightest clue as to what they're doing. They maybe have one transaction a year and aren't up to date with all the MREC standards. They don't know this contract from a buyer's agency agreement. They don't know anything, but they end up legally representing you. This is protection on your end from people like that, okay? And that's kind of like that's a very decent way of looking at it, I'd like to think. But either way, so thinking about it from there, let's say, though, you get that one agent that's just, well, and like we discussed, they don't know what they're talking about, they seem like an amateur, or they're just a rude person to begin with. What if we aren't a good fit as buyer and agent? Can the agreement be canceled at any time? And the answer is yes, under specific parameters. If you flip forward to section 11, actually, changes and amendments, it quite literally states any changes to this document just need to be legally signed. Sign and initial. That's pretty much all it is. So as long as both parties agree to it, you're all good in the hood.
And sometimes that happens.
And it does.
Happens because some people just don't click.
Exactly.
Some people think that they're going to, and then they get into this, and they're like, hey, you know what? This sort of relationship that we have, like an individual to individual, not even business related, is just not working out. And it's just in their both best interests to split apart.
Exactly.
And go with someone, not only that the agent can go with the consumer or potential buyer that they feel may listen to them or they just get along with better, but as well for the consumer to be like, man, I just really enjoy this agent's presence and company more so than the other agent, and would rather have them represent me than who I had before.
And the difference between a good agent and a bad agent is a good agent, if you don't get along with them, will recommend you to someone else.
Exactly.
They won't leave you hanging. Keep that in mind, okay? But that kind of brings us to our last question. This kind of goes beyond the buyer's agency agreement in most regards, but it's still something that I think is very important to address as we're talking about the agency side of things. So how do we, as agents, help buyers compete in this market? What contingencies do you think are worth getting / foregoing when it comes to buying? So one thing I want to point out, first and foremost, we as agents, for our sake, have to kind of keep our cards close to our chest with this question. We can't go away giving our secrets, unfortunately. But one thing I will say is, if you want to talk about contingencies and contract writers, big important ones like the appraisal writer, financing, inspections, inclusions and exclusions. You want to talk about earnest money. We can talk about all the things we can do with the contract itself. There are so many things that we, as literate agents, if you would, can do to the contract to make it more appealing from a buying perspective. So for instance, I've written contracts before that we might not outbid someone, like we might offer like 100 and there's a better offer of 110. But because of other ways we can manipulate the contract, we get the offer even if we're 10% less. Okay? Now granted, these are me just using numbers in this case. But it's not always about the purchase price. You can talk about closing costs. You can talk about earnest money. You can talk about inspection periods. You can talk about this. You can talk about that. You can talk about this. You can talk about that. But not only that, but what do we as agents have that the average consumer doesn't have that we can provide? We mentioned it earlier today. We talked about like the programs and the software that we have access to.
The resources.
So if you want to
resources available.
So yeah, if you want to elaborate onto like what we have available.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that agents have, number one, like you have to be licensed to use, and you get, with your license and your ID and all of that, you get access to softwares that are not available just to the general public. So this includes market trends, market data, stuff specifically that you can look to from a county perspective all the way down to an individual home. And you can use the information provided with some of those resources to influence how the contract can look when you're presenting an offer that you would like on what could possibly be your potential home.
Exactly. That's the thing, like we're not appraisers by any stretch of the imagination, but an important part of our job is coming up with an educated estimation as to how much a property might be worth. So like for instance, I showed a property out here in St. Charles. It was the historic district of St. Charles where average house price is maybe anywhere between 130 to 170, which I know that's a pretty big range, but it does vary from the age of the house and such. Property was valued at 150 on the market, and I walked into the house and I was like immediately like, nope, way too high. I think the property honestly would have gone for 135. Now granted, with the market we're in, unfortunately, someone spent $150,000 on that house, and they're gonna feel that next year.
Or if it doesn't
tomorrow.
appraise, I was gonna say if it doesn't appraise to what they put on it, then they might not be able to have their loan coverage over the entire property.
Which I hope they're contingent upon financing. Which
Yep.
again, an inexperienced agent would not put it as contingent upon financing. But so those are the vast majority of the questions that I wanted to address today. I know we covered a lot of topics here. I figured this was going to be a much more entertaining episode than. Well, if you look at line 1, section 1,
Yeah.
then the agreement begins on. Yeah, no, that would
Real
have.
estate, real estate contract ASMR style. Line 1.
Purchase price.
But there were some really good questions that you guys
Yeah.
submitted, so we thank you very much for that.
Yeah, that was seriously awesome. Thank you all for your questions, comments, concerns. Next episode, we're going to be addressing the flip side of this, the listing side. So if you guys have any questions, we're going to put this to the public, and feel free to shoot us your questions. Other than that, my name is Michael Murphy.
Josh K.
And this,
Davis.
he was here too.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, everyone.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.